I'm Jessica Cannella, co-founder and president of Oak Harvest Financial Group. And today I wanted to chat with you a little bit about our Core4 framework, which is a blend of investment management and financial planning. And I really wanted to focus on that very first pillar, the peace of mind pillar. When it comes to retirement and retirement planning, peace of mind is paramount. And I'm sure that everybody is experiencing a little bit of fear right now with what is going on in the market, especially if you don't have a great understanding as to what safe tools are available to you. In today's interest rate environment, unfortunately, gone are the days where we can just put a chunk of change in our savings account and get a nice 3 or 5% yield back scot-free with no market risk. Also, our bond market is not, let's say it's less than ideal, yielding 1.5%, 2.5%, barely keeping pace with inflation. Where we look to provide peace of mind in retirees' lives when it becomes appropriate based on their own set of circumstances might be in the insurance industry, and specifically through the use of a tool known as, I like to call it the A word, because there's a lot of misconceptions if you have not been educated. The bad A word that I'm referring to is annuity. And there are several different types of annuities out there in the marketplace, and today I wanted to focus on one that we use here quite often, again, when it is appropriate. It's not a magic bullet, but that we use here at Oak Harvest Financial Group, called a fixed indexed annuity. A couple of things about fixed index annuities. They are known for safety. That word fixed pertains to the fact that your principal value, or the amount of money that you fund your annuity with from the outset, cannot be reduced due to market risk. They are 100% safe from market risk. That's that word fixed. The word indexed refers to what we're going to dive into today, which is the ability for your principal to grow as it indexes with the upside of the market based on index options available within your contract. Now, these strategies are offered through insurance companies. Remember the old childhood fable, the 3 little piggies with the big bad wolf that would huff and puff and blow your house down? Well, we liken that to the financial industry, and we call the insurance industry the brick house. The reason that we call it the brick house is that it is rock solid. Even in a financial crisis, insurance companies, by their nature, how they are structured, have to have a dollar for dollar reserve. And that's very important when you're talking about investing a lump sum of your hard-earned dollars into a strategy like a fixed index annuity, is that these insurance carriers, they have contractual obligation that if they have, in our example, $100,000 of your money, that they have to have it on reserve for you to the tune of $100,000. We know that in the banking industry, it is the FDIC insurance that is up to $250,000 per account. Very different rules for the insurance industry. Fixed index annuities are very safe. Now, there are many considerations to be aware of that we'll cover today when you're considering the purchase or utilizing a strategy like a fixed index annuity. I say this all the time with my clients on meetings and prospective clients. There is no magic bullet in finance, and an annuity is no different. The specific kind of annuity that we're going to talk about today, again, is the fixed index annuity. Now, one of the most noteworthy things about a fixed index annuity is that you're going to have the option to participate in the market upside in exchange for no market downside or no market risk to your principal, the amount of money that you put into the contract. You will have what we call a par rate or participation rate. Par rate is short for participation, which is going to pre-declare what the percentage will be that you can participate in any one of the index that your contract is following. And so for the sake of easy math and illustration purposes, we're gonna say that in this example, our index is the S&P 500, and that we have a 50% participation rate. So this would be, depending on how you look at it, a consideration or benefit of a fixed index annuity, I call it a consideration, is that the insurance company says, hey, we're not going to allow you to participate 100% in the market upside in exchange for no market risk. They're in the business of making money, no secrets there. We're gonna hold on to 50% of whatever the upside is, but in years where the market does not perform or is down, you will not lose any of your principal. So again, for easy math, we're gonna follow this example here that a client puts $100,000 into their fixed index annuity contract in the year 2022. And we're recording here in July. So I'm gonna say from July 2022, you put $100,000 into this type of contract. A year later, it's called point to point on your contract anniversary date. So it would then be July of 2023. Let's say that the S&P 500 yields 10%. From the point in time July 22 to the point in time 12 months later in July 23, positive 10%. Now, remember the participation rate is 50. So I like to do a little bullet point right here illustrating that you're not going the full climb up with the market. You're going halfway up for 50% participation rate or 5% interest credited to your original investment of $100,000. What's really cool about a fixed index annuity is that your new principal, every year that interest is credited to your account, it locks in. And it's called an annual reset. Now in the fine print, depending on what contracts you're investing in, you wanna be cognizant of how long is the reset period. And we're gonna use the example of annual. So 12-month period, whatever interest is credited becomes your new principal protected value. So in this example, just a quick recap, the market goes up 10% from July 2022 to July 2023. When you're sitting down and reviewing your contract with your advisor, it's positive 10%. You get 50% participation on that S&P 500 index for 5% interest credited to your initial investment of $100,000. That's gonna put you at $105,000. Every year that interest is credited to your account, what I love about the fixed index annuity tool is that your new principal protected value locks in, and that is called an annual reset. Now, in the fine print of whatever contract that you're purchasing with whichever insurance carrier, you want to make sure that you understand how the reset works. This one is an annual reset. So in English, every 12 months, when interest is credited from point in time to point in time, in our example here, July 2022 to July 2023, our new principal protected value is no longer $100,000, it's now $105,000. And in certain contracts, it's very important that you have your advisor explain to you, is it an annual reset? Is it a 2-year reset? Is it a 3-year reset? I've seen as high as 6-year resets. And that's very important. What that means, again, in English, is that your interest will not be credited. If it's not an annual reset, it won't be credited to when the clock starts again. If it's 2 years, it'd be interest is credited every 2 years. If it's 6 years, then every 6 years, taking a total average of whatever the index performed over that 6 or 2 year or 1 year period. I digress. Let's look at what happens in a down year. Now, the next, the contract is annual reset. So now we know what our principal value was at the end of July of 2023. So now the clock starts again. And now it goes from July 2023 to July 2024. And let's say that the market does what the market is doing right now. It's going down, it's been turbulent. And when we look at July 2023 through July 2024, the S&P 500, we're in a recession and it goes down negative 20%. What happens? Nothing. This is a defensive tool. You are staying at 105 for the year 2024. Your principal locked in from the year previous. The market did negative 20. We mentioned there is no market risk. So that means 0% of 0 is 0. So you get 0 interest credited, big goose egg, and your principal protected value sticks at 105. I'll take this moment to tell you that it's the 0 years that you would be purchasing this product or this type of strategy. And fixed index annuity is not a tool because you want to aggressively grow your portfolio. You'll have some growth, along the way. Typically, over a 10-year period, you can expect to average between 4 and 6% year over year. That includes some 0 years, and if you're lucky, some double-digit years, and we'll look at that instance next. But this is a defensive strategy. This is the peace of mind pillar in our Core4 framework. This is the strategy where you want to say, I don't want my money to go down in the bad years. And we're going to look at a graph that's on our website on oakharvestfinancialgroup.com after we run through this illustration so that you can see over a long period of time, an 18-year time frame, how this strategy actually, based on this criteria, has performed over a 18-year time horizon. So, picking up where we left off here, now we're looking at the clock starting again for our annual reset from 2020, July of 2024, going to July of 2025. Let's say that we are coming out of the recession, and when we know when that generally happens, that we oftentimes have a couple of good years after that. So let's say the market goes up 25% on the S&P index, and we get 50% for our participation rate of 25%. And that's a whopping 12.5%. Credit it to wherever we left off for compounding interest. That's very powerful. So on our 105, because that's where we left off in our down year in 24, now we get credited 12.5% on 105, which brings us to a new principal protected value of $118,000 and some change, but for easy math, I just wrote $118,000. And this will bring me to another point. I feel like sometimes annuities get a bad reputation because of a lack of explanation at the forefront. What I'm referring to here is there a cap? We talked about a floor. The floor is this. There's no market risk. You cannot go below 0, like the example we gave in the year 2024. Also, in the fine print with some of these insurance companies, you want to understand, is there a cap? Is there a ceiling to my upside potential? And I've seen this quite often, where it might say, okay, yes, you're going to get your participation rate at 50% on whatever the S&P 500 index performs point to point. And as long as that number does not exceed 10%, you will get that interest credited. 10% being the cap. Now, we tend to look for strategies that do not have caps because these double-digit years are very important when we're looking to average 4 to 6%. We want to nail it out of the park when the opportunity, especially coming off of a 0 year, is there for the taking. It's not typical that you'll average double digits in this type of strategy, but it is also very possible that you can. And so having the flexibility of not being pigeonholed to a ceiling of your upside potential becomes very important, and it's something that you really want your advisor to be forthcoming about how your specific contract works before you purchase it. You kind of get the gist here. This will bring me to another point of fixed index annuities. A big consideration on a fixed index annuity, you can see that it's gradually going to grow over time. Time is one of the biggest considerations when we look at utilizing this tool. Typically, a fixed index annuity has a 10-year term, 6, 7, or 10 years. Now, 10 years is a commitment. And so it becomes very important that you understand what are you getting into for 10 years, because it becomes very expensive by way of fees or surrender charges, or you'll hear it called an exit fee. They're assessed by the insurance company if you break the contract term. So effectively, the insurance company wants to know, in exchange for giving you a participation rate on an index with no market risk, typically low or no fees, and we'll discuss that more in a moment, how long can they hold your money for? Because these insurance companies have been doing this for decades. In fact, many of them are still enjoying bond returns from the 80s. Because they know how long they can hold on to your money for. And so that is extremely important, that you're not putting too much money into a contract that you're going to have for 10 years. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how the surrender charges or exit fees work to give you some education around that. That is extremely important, that if you are considering the use of this tool, that you understand what it is that you're signing up for, how long you're signing up for it, and what the cost is to you to get out of it. We'll jump over to that in just a moment. I wanted to show you a continuation of how this works, I promised, on our website. You can check out a graph here. I'm going to show you where to grab it from. You're going to go under the Knowledge Center and under Annuity Education. Some great articles here, frequently asked questions. I love this article. It illustrates what we just covered. It's called The Power of Zero. And it assumes the same criteria that we just covered in my little whiteboard illustration, only now we're looking at an 18-year time horizon. And this is, when I say it assumes the same criteria, I'm referring to the participation rate being at 50%, using $100,000 as our figure. And then what we're looking at here are a red line, which represents the S&P 500, and then the green line, which is indexing with the S&P 500 without the downside. And so you can see that following the red line, it's a turbulent ride. It's following the ups and downs of the market. I like to explain this in meetings with my clients in plain English. I like to think of this illustration as two guys are outside and they're comparing their lawns, and they get on the topic of finance. The market's turbulent, and neighbor A says, hey Bob, how's it going? Your grass is greener over there. How's your portfolio doing? And he says, oh, it's 1998. I'm doing great. I'm following the S&P 500. I'm in an index fund, and I'm taking the climb up. And then George across the way, he said, oh, okay, well, I didn't make quite as much. If you can see these figures, it's 120 and 115, because my advisor has me in this tool called a fixed index annuity. And if it wasn't explained correctly, as the market is going up and you're only recouping, and I say only, but you're recouping 50% of the market upside, you might be a little bit upset if their neighbor Bob is making more money in his portfolio just in the S&P 500. And we're going to assume that both of these individuals are retired. So the year 2000 happens, and now George is probably pretty upset if he's talking to Bob, the neighbor, a couple years later, and Bob is telling him, my portfolio is up over 130,000. How's yours doing? And he's hanging around 125. And then in the very next year, 2001, we had the dot-com bust, 9/11 happen, and we have a crash in the market. Bob is probably feeling a little bit queasy, especially if he's retired, that his portfolio is basically cut in half. George is probably feeling pretty content that he stayed locked in at 125, and for 3 years you can see, until the market started to rebound, that he stayed at 125 for 3 years. So for 3 years, he went in, reviewed his contract statement with his advisor, and they informed him that you received 0 interest credited. And again, I'll take this opportunity. This is why you would consider purchasing this strategy or utilizing it in your portfolio, because it's those 0 years that are really important. And for this reason, when Bob finally starts to climb back up, he's starting at a much lesser value than George across the way, who has left off at 125,000 and then gradually took the climb back up. Right about when Bob is probably feeling pretty good in 2007, and his portfolio has exceeded his initial losses over here, or his gains before the crash of 01. The year is 2007, and he's feeling back on top of the world. And we all know what happens in 2008. And it's really sad to see that his investment goes back down to 100,000. And so in retirement, it's not so much the money that hurts, because if you're still working, these are buying opportunities that Bob has had along the way if he has earned income coming in. But once you're on a fixed income, or you're having to turn all of your nest egg into that you've accumulated, and you're having to distribute it back to yourself, this becomes really painful. And it's not so much the dollar amount, it's the time. It's that time is our most important investment element. And so you can see that he's right back where he started in 1998. 10 years later, he has lost 10 years in retirement. And $45,000. Whereas George across the way, using the fixed index annuity tool, has steadily and surely climbed up with the S&P 500. When the market is down, he recoups zeros in his accounts, but he stays level. He goes sideways instead of down, up, up, down. And over time, you can see that another way I like to explain it is that the fixed index annuity is performing like the turtle, and the S&P 500 is the hare. It's a race. And that slow and surely the turtle wins the race in this illustration. So check out this article on our website, very informative. You can read a little bit more about functionally how the fixed index annuity works. And we're gonna jump back over here and talk about some of the considerations. We talked about caps, we talked about compound interest is another one. In the example that I ran through and the example on that chart, there is compound interest available, not always in a fixed index annuity. That again is something in the fine print that you would want your advisor to be upfront with you about. Fees. I put a question mark next to fees because often there are no fees in a fixed index annuity or very low fees. The reason for that is it's a very consumer friendly option. It's also, I believe, one of the reasons that you won't hear about a fixed index annuity or how it could be of benefit to you in your portfolio from big brokerage firms or banking institutions, because there are typically not ongoing fees paid to your advisor. I say typically because as the interest rate environment has suffered over the last 10 years, interest rates have been very low. These insurance companies have begun to assess low fees. I say low, to me that means south of 2%, generally around 1%, 1.25, 1.5% on your cash value or the amount of principal that you put into your contract. One of the things I hear from different people is that you want to stay away from a fixed index annuity because your advisor gets paid a big fee. And that's not incorrect. Your advisor is representing an insurance carrier. They're a licensed agent. And these insurance carriers many of them use their marketing budget, in other words, money that they would have otherwise used to do commercials, blimps, mascots, to explain how their strategies work. That would be a pretty ineffective use of those marketing dollars. In other words, a gecko is not getting the message across everything I just explained. And I feel like if you're not seeking this information out, a 30-second commercial spot would not do its due diligence with all of the fine print to explain what we just ran through today. So in exchange for, basically they repurpose their marketing dollars that they would have otherwise used, like our big, household name insurance companies that sell you auto and property insurance. These life insurance companies use that budget to compensate or commission licensed agents to recommend, when appropriate, and determine if a prospect is suitable to be in one of these strategies. And that is in the form of a commission, and it generally is a percentage of whatever you have allocated into the strategy. And this is very important as a consideration. First and foremost, it does not come out of the account owner's money. If you put $100,000 into the contract, your advisor's commission is not coming out of your $100,000. It is very important, though, that you work with a reputable, preferably fiduciary, that knows what they are talking about and has options all over the place and is not pigeonholed to just one insurance carrier with one or two strategies. There's a lot of crap products out there. It's all should be very goals-based, because you don't want an advisor picking their commission. The most important thing when it comes to your money and deciding if a fixed index annuity is right for you is the amount that you're going to put it in. I mentioned a couple of moments ago that an advisor is generally compensated on the amount that they put into the strategy. So let's say you have $1 million portfolio. An insurance company might allow the agent or advisor to put up to 80% of your $1 million into a 10-year term strategy, and they are commissioned on the amount that goes into the strategy. Why is this a conflict of interest if it's not explained to you? because you probably don't want to put 80% of your liquid net worth, which I'll cover in a moment, into an annuity. And if your advisor or insurance agent cares more about their own retirement, they might put as much of your hard-earned dollars into this strategy as possible because it's going to increase their commission. It's generally based off of a percentage of what goes into the strategy. That does not mean that you should rule out a fixed index annuity. It's okay to get paid for the hard work that an advisor does to explain. It does mean that you should really do your homework on which firm and which advisor or insurance agent you're working with. And I have a list of questions as you're interviewing your advisors that really digs deep into some annuity conflicts of interest so that you can feel very informed as the consumer if you are considering this type of strategy in your portfolio. I mentioned liquidity, and that's something that I wanted to talk about between these two. There is often called a free withdrawal feature or a liquidity feature built into these contracts. And it can be generally somewhere between 5 and 10%. So on $100,000, you put it in, and for 10 years, generally beginning about the second year of the contract, again, this is a fine print thing, so we want to be sure that we are being educated by our advisor on how this works. You have, let's say in year 2, you can withdraw somewhere between 5 and 10%. 10% is pretty typical from what I have seen. So 10% of $100,000 is $10,000. That other $90,000 that you put in the contract for 10 years is illiquid, otherwise subject to what we call a surrender charge table. Now I'm going to explain this in theory. Again, fine print thing here. If you decide to do a strategy like this on your policy delivery, your statement page, it will give you exactly what the surrender schedule is. But this is the easiest way I feel to explain it. This is very important, so I like to make it pretty memorable for my clients. Okay. The first line is representing percentages that the insurance company will charge you for accessing more than 10% of whatever your principal value has grown to after year 2, generally in the contract. The bottom line is representing in what year you are in the contract. So I mentioned that typically fixed index annuities have a 10-year term. If you need to access your principal beyond the 10% free withdrawal feature in year 2, the next dollar over the $10,000 in this example would be dinged at 8% paid to the insurance company. That's pretty hefty. That's why this amount is extremely important relative to your portfolio. In year 5, in the 5th year, you are subject to a 5% penalty of whatever this has grown to, less the 10% free withdrawal feature. Now I say what this has grown to because let's say in year 5, your $100,000 is now $125,000. You can withdraw 10% of whatever it's grown to in whatever year you're withdrawing. The next dollar over is subject to wherever you land on this surrender charge schedule. At the end of the 10 years, you are 100% liquid and you have 0 surrender charges. And your advisor will talk to you about options. You can oftentimes leave your funds in the annuity contract. The time frame doesn't reset, but it can keep growing on the cash value side, just like we talked about earlier. Again, that's fine print. It just depends. You can reshop it. You can invest it into your investments portfolio, but the insurance company wants to know how long can they hold on to your money in exchange for, in this example, 50% of market upside, 0% market risk. How long do they get to hold the money onto the money before it is 100% liquid? And again, typically that's a 10-year period. So this is extremely important that we cover surrender charge or exit charge fees. Today we covered a lot of information about a fixed index annuity, and I'm hoping that on the next video we can cover more about how we use fixed index annuities. Today we really just covered the inner working and things like surrender charges, participation rate, and how a fixed index annuity might fit into your portfolio. If you found this video informative or you have questions, feedback, something else that you'd like me to dive a little bit deeper into, drop a comment below, give the video a thumbs up, and ring the notification bell so that you know when new content is being dropped.